of experiment. This is our first live in-person podcast. For all of you who don't know, we started this podcast three and a half years ago during the COVID shutdown, and there wasn't much going on. We couldn't do something like this in person, so we figured what better way to get knowledge out there than the podcast. So welcome, everybody. This is episode 105 of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. I'm your co-host, Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm back with Tim.
And I am your co-host, Timothy Peterson. 105 episodes. It really is amazing. It's been quite a ride. We've decided to focus exclusively on B2B e-commerce because there was quite a gap. There really aren't as many podcasts out there. There's not as much knowledge sharing out there about B2B specifically. We've both worked in B2B and B2C. We've worked with a lot of different clients, had a lot of fun with that. But the podcast, having a great time now. So I'm going to just pause for a moment because we actually are recording this to put out on our YouTube channel and all of that to insert our sponsor mentions. So let me pause just for a moment there.
Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com. Book a session and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance.
I hope that works for our producers, just that moment that I just gave. And now I'm going to throw it back to Isaiah to introduce our guest, Bill Mirabito.
Yeah, I'm super excited to introduce Bill Mirabito. Funny story, because I want to give a little background. We started the Boston e-commerce meetup, I don't know, almost 10 years ago, and that's actually how we met. And this is kind of like the evolution of that. That was kind of more of an informal meetup. We felt like Boston deserved something a little bit better, a better version of all that, which hopefully this is and will continue to become every year. Bill Mirabito is a partner at Chameleon Collective, someone that's been in e-commerce for multiple decades, and honestly someone I've learned a lot from in my career. So really, really happy to be here with you. Tell everyone just your background and who you are so they understand.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm Bill Mirabito. As Isaiah mentioned, I'm a partner at Chameleon Collective. We're a professional services firm that focuses on business transformation. We help our clients in 5 key areas. These are customer touch points, branding, marketing, customer experience, e-commerce, and sales. And we help them drive sustainable results from within using 3 key levers. Number 1 is embedded experts. Number 2 is fractional leaders like myself. And number 3 is recruiters of talent. So that's Chameleon Collective in a nutshell. And me, I've been doing e-commerce now for over 30 years.
Bill, you and I worked together quite some time ago on a couple projects. One of them was Hearst for Shop Bazaar a long time ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
My gosh. And I was the first head of e-commerce at BJ's Wholesale Club. I've worked with incredible brands from Fanatics to Under Armour to Godiva Chocolate and many others. And these days I'm serving as a fractional CTO and Chief Digital Officer for many of our clients. So.
A quick shout out to BJ's. Some of our snacks were provided by BJ's out there.
And do people realize that BJ is an actual person? I don't know if folks know that. It's not just made up. I mean, there is a woman named BJ who I've met as well.
Beverly Jean.
Beverly Jean.
Yes. A good friend
So that's a good segue to one of the first topics that I want to get into. And BJ's and Costco, in some ways, are like an intersection between B2B and B2C. It's like wholesale for consumer, but we, Trellis, as a business, bought stuff from BJ's and do it all the time, and potentially Costco. And I think you're seeing kind of like a two-way shift which is making B2B commerce really interesting. So you have some of the guests already here that were speaking talked about this. D2C is, I don't want to say failing, but I think people are realizing that D2C by itself isn't usually enough for most brands. So you need kind of a mix of D2C and retail and wholesale and kind of, which essentially is B2B, right? Selling to retailers. And then on the flip side, you have kind of traditional manufacturers and distributors realizing, oh, wow, I got to like innovate and be more easy to, to work with and modernize and become almost a little bit more D2C-like. And you have kind of it coming from both sides. So curious to hear your perspective on, those two kind of variations of what's happening.
Well, for any business, the more profitable channels you can be in, the faster you'll grow. So for manufacturers who make product, when you talk to them about their customers, they think of the retailers and their distribution partners. They don't think of the end user, but more and more customer demand is expecting them to have a relationship with the end consumer. And so we're seeing a lot of manufacturers want to develop that D2C, direct-to-consumer relationship that they never had before when all they did was B2B. On the flip side, you've got a lot of D2C customers who see that they can grow their business by getting on more shelves and working with distribution partners, and so they're trying to get sophisticated in that sense as well.
I think one of the things that I've seen, I'm wondering if you're seeing the same, Bill, is companies like in CPG or manufacturers of apparel acquiring direct-to-consumer or primarily direct-to-consumer brands in order to get into that space even quicker.
Yep.
So if you say, I was just wondering what you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think acquisitions of that nature are usually to help with accelerating transformation. Within the organization, they don't yet have the muscle to be able to do that or the experience. And so they're looking to acquire that experience. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it fails miserably. And it really depends on the organization's willingness to adapt.
Oh, let's talk about failing miserably. That's always a lot of fun. I like that. So I could certainly pull a few examples together. Do you have any that you come to mind? You don't have to name the company, unless people want to hear, of course. But you don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with, I can think of one within the last few years that's a multi-billion-dollar company. If I mentioned it, you would all know. And, they set up a direct-to-consumer business, and they wanted to see that grow, and it was not doing very well, and so they brought us in, and we helped double the business within a year, and they said, okay, well, if you can do that on the direct-to-consumer side, what could you do for our B2B business? And so we began to talk, and we said, well, man, you're not really helping out your business customers. You don't make it easy to do business with. Your competition's stealing them. Amazon is stealing them. B2B, think of that. Amazon is stealing B2B customers. And I said, these are the things that you need to do. Well, we're not going to do those things. What? And so, I mean, a lot of times businesses just don't want to adapt. They stick their head in the sand, and they say, our culture is our culture, and we're not going to change.
You said something very interesting to me. I don't know, could have been a year, 2 years back. I lost track of time in our relationship. But I think you said that one of the reasons, and it's both in B2C, but I think especially in B2B, where I think a lot of these companies have huge opportunity. I think they have a lot of opportunity to grow. They have, potentially huge competitive advantages in whatever they manufacture, the inventory they have as distribution, and that part of it is some of these people just don't want to put their name on the line to put themselves at risk of saying, hey, we're gonna grow 30%. We're gonna make these changes. This is how we're gonna get better, and this is how the company's gonna move forward, let's say through B2B commerce. And that's actually a lot of what's preventing some of the innovation in B2B commerce, even though, like, theoretically it should be there, but there's almost this hesitation to do that.
Well, I think the fundamental difference, and we mentioned this on the last time we had a podcast several years ago, is that culture really matters. And within an organization, the key to growth, especially in the direct-to-consumer, if we've learned anything, it's customer centricity. You really need to know who your audience is, how you attract them, how you engage them, how you convert them, how you retain them. And if you can figure that out, you can grow your business quickly. But if you are not customer-centric and you're centered on the channels, or you're centered on the brand, or you're centered on, God forbid, a personality within the organization, you're just going to fail to your competition.
So one of the things that you're bringing up is again a perennial topic that comes up on the podcast, and it really is removing the word channel sometimes, right? Because when you get in conversations with people, especially in the B2B world, they'll say, well, we don't do that channel, or it might take a lot of investment to get into that channel. But it's really about sort of harmonizing your approach, figuring out the best way to serve all possible customers. It's not necessarily just about the channel or the next channel or omni-channel. It really is servicing all of these people in the best possible way everywhere that you can. And it is a culture thing. I mean, I'll touch on that just for a second too. There was a project I worked on a while ago with a company, I think it's 125 years old, massive, worldwide, multi-billion-dollar. They didn't really even have much of a process in place to talk about how they would do to B2B e-commerce. They really didn't even have a great process in place for it. So we had to step back and create that process, and then they got to the B2B.
That's right, that's right. I think a lot of times businesses say, well, if we just build it, they'll come. And they put it out there, and the customer says, well, the shipping costs are too high, or it takes too long to get it, or there are just issues with the product, or they don't really think through walking through the experience like a customer. And so they're focusing in on their own needs, their own plans, and they haven't really figured out how to do it in a way that is competitive and compelling for the end user.
So one thing I think that makes B2B e-commerce so interesting is that it's generally, there's always exceptions, right? I would say more complicated than B2C. You might have contract pricing or special pricing, potentially LTL or freight shipping or some sort of complex shipping, those kind of things. What do you recommend as ways that and I think that's part of the problem is companies either try and do all of that at once, which is probably not realistic, right? Like they're trying to tackle all these complex issues in one shot or one project, and maybe they need a multi-phase approach. How do you kind of like coach someone through that learning curve of complexity that is, it's not just like spinning up, potentially a simple D2C store, which I think is a little bit easier to get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think having a roadmap is only one part of the equation. You also need a resource plan. You need to understand how much money to invest in technology, in services, in talent, in order to execute the plans that you have. And I think that oftentimes companies go into this and say, I want to do everything, but I want to spend little, right? And it's like, well, why would you think that, right? So you've got to have not just a plan of things you want to do, but you have to have the resources to execute. So there's a certain degree of investment. It might be capital investment. It might be, the budget for marketing and operating expenses and payroll. But you need to have a resource plan of the things you need in place in order to execute. And a lot of the times that involves an ROI. So you've got to model it out. If we do these things, how much are we going to, earn in sales and contribution margin? And what's that going to cost us? And where do we break even? And when do we see the returns on that?
So let me dive in on the resource plan part. This is just an amusing anecdote that Bill may have heard before, but there was, again, a company that I worked with a while back on B2B, And they were all excited about making a whole bunch of changes, and it sounded great on the surface. But where they ended up is they told me one day, well, we have $285,000. And I said, for me? You know, is that like my pay, or is that like, no, they said, that's the total budget. And I said, okay, then why did you talk such a big game over all of this, time? This is not going to really work for you. It ended up being a process where it ended up after a series of meetings, and I actually was beamed into a board meeting for this company, which is just beyond me. I can't even believe that. They ended up deciding to really commit real money in the millions of dollars over multiple years. And, long story short, they ended up doing the right thing. It ended up working out for them. But that initial conversation of we have $285,000, they just didn't understand what they were really getting into at that point.
I want to, sorry, before you get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the magnitude of those resources, right? So for some companies, that's a lot of money, right? 285,000. Is that that resource plan, is that kind of how you think about what's possible for them? So if you have, 285,000 to spend on this plan is going to be very different than if you have $1.2 million. And is that part of a lot of what drives the strategy and what's realistic for ROI for that particular company?
It is realistic if you have the right plan. For example, I recently, this past month, had a new client sign on who is a B2B company, but is in the direct-to-consumer business. And their direct-to-consumer business is just a fraction of the overall business. This is almost $1 billion company, and they're doing $35 million online, and they said, we want to get to $150 million. Well, you're doing $35 million, so what is it worth to you to go from 35 to 150, right? And so you've got to build out a plan. What would need to be true in order to get there, and how much time does it take? What level of investment does it take to get there? So
I think kind of going back to the original question that we kicked off with, we're seeing kind of the intersection of B2C and B2B, and they're kind of almost merging into one. Amazon is actually the largest B2B e-commerce platform in the world. So a lot of people don't know that, or in the United States, I believe. So I think Alibaba is number one technically, but Amazon is the largest. Their B2B program, I think, is 40 billion or 30 billion now. It's something like that on just B2B users. And so what's interesting about what they did is they actually launched B2B separately a long time ago. I don't know if you remember that, as a separate channel. And then they merged it all in. So now you log in. I think even Trellis, we converted our personal account into the B2B account.
Sure.
And so you kind of have this merging almost of hey, I'm just going to upgrade to B2B. And I think a lot of the platforms, obviously Shopify was here today. They now have company accounts, and you can have company accounts natively within the same website. So I could go to my theoretical Shopify site, buy as a consumer, or sign up as a business, get special. So where do you see that going in terms of the potential for these companies to kind of have maybe one experience that's slightly different for B2B and B2C, or do you think in some cases it should be a completely separate platform, completely separate website? I've seen both, right? And I've seen both work okay. How do you advise someone as to how to approach that?
Yeah, I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all response to that.
Yeah.
I think businesses are different. I'm working with one business right now where, they supply, products for businesses to manufacture, finished product. So they're not creating finished product; they're creating the ingredients and the tools that go into making a finished product. So all of their customers are effectively businesses, but some of their customers are huge CPG companies, huge. And some of their customers are moms and pops who are doing business at their kitchen table. And the needs of that small customer who's selling on Etsy or at a farmer's market is very, very different than the needs of a big CPG with 50 buyers who are using the site to place transactions. So in that particular case, we recommended a single site where you could invite some of the smaller businesses to apply for a B2B account and have B2B functionality, what I call behind the velvet rope. So it's not out there in front of the consumer cluttering things up or creating friction in the conversion process, but it's there once you log in, if you truly are a B2B user, to help you do business.
Yeah, and I've seen that approach work relatively well for another company too. I had the same sort of situation, and they sell restaurant supplies. So you can imagine the range of companies that they would, type of businesses that they would work with, from, again, mom and pop to multinational type businesses. And there is sort of a velvet rope. It's one site, and there's a way to access everything that you need as you get bigger and more sophisticated and have to have more people involved. And that seems to cover a lot of the bases for them.
Yeah, but you don't want to invite a consumer to be applying for terms, right?
Yeah, unless Jordan's Furniture, maybe, if you.
There you go. Yeah, of course.
There's always an exception, but so would you say? I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is, and there's going to be cases where it makes sense to have them separated, but it sounds like more and more is going to move towards this idea of having the consumer-facing site with kind of this gated premium experience for B2B. And do you think that in some ways that could be almost like a membership experience for like premium consumers, and then the level above that is like a business, and it's almost like these levels of buying kind of?
Yeah, I mean, you apply for an account, and you can ask questions on the application. I mean, this is what BJ's does too. I mean, if you're applying for a business card, you've got to answer certain questions and provide your EIN number, and so that proves that you're truly a business, and you get a certain discount level, if you are truly a business. Otherwise, you come in as a consumer. So, I think for some sites, they can find a way to merge those two experiences on a single site. But for other businesses, the two customer sets are so vastly different that it makes sense to have two sites.
I mean, what's interesting, and Isaiah brought this up at the head too, in the B2B world, for folks to just conceptualize this, it is about pricing, right? It's how many different types of pricing? Is there tiered pricing, or what is the way that you approach it? It's payment. It's talking about the ways in which you pay for something. If you're buying $1 million worth of supplies, you're not putting that on your Amex card, most likely. Maybe you'd like to get the points, but most likely they won't let you do that.
The black card, maybe?
The black card. And also the shipping. I mean, the classic shipping thing that I came up against early on when I was starting to work with some B2B clients was, I'm buying the same stove, but I'm buying it for 3,000 restaurants around the country, right? And I need to have it coordinated to ship to each of those 3,000 restaurants. So it's fascinatingly complex in a way that you don't get necessarily with B2C.
That's right.
So this is normally our format is an hour. It's easy to fill up the hour. We're going to run out of time, but I want to change gears a little bit. And I know you have a lot of experience dealing with quite a bit more than what people think of as e-commerce, having worked with you in that you deal with all the systems like order management, ERP, PIM, whatever, there's so many different systems. It's so much more complicated than just the e-commerce platform, especially in B2B. And one of the things that we see is like a huge barrier to modernization in B2B organizations is the ERPs are often, way out of date. They haven't been upgraded for 10, 20 years. And even if they're upgraded, they're generally not as friendly systems to integrate with. I don't know what it is. These ERP companies they make it hard to. Not always, but they can be hard to integrate with, and then that's where all their core pricing data is, their operations, and most of the B2B operations are very ingrained, kind of behind the scenes in the ERP. So, do you have any advice or kind of ways that you've helped kind of bring that forward, or I guess how do you approach that, right? Because it's such a complex thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, ERP is your business, right? I mean, it's foundationally, it's where finance happens, and where the general ledger is, and where a lot of the data resides. It's how the whole operation comes together, and so it's really important. As a fractional CTO and and Chief Digital Officer. I help a lot of companies, not just with the e-commerce platform, but also, as you mentioned, the ERP and the points of sale and order management systems, warehouse management, and so forth. And I would just say, generally speaking, this stuff needs to be maintained. I'm really thankful that we are in a period of technology evolution where composable architecture really allows us through middleware to have these things loosely coupled, so that when you need to upgrade something, it's not creating a mess all across the business. And more and more as companies properly architect and integrate their systems, I think you're going to see much more stability and much more modernization.
I'm glad you said knowledgeably. I mean, I think one of the big takeaways from this this conversation, at least for me, is that you need to have people who really understand what's going on. You need to have people who understand what's possible, and you need to have people who can access all of the right tech and tools that are necessary.
I'm just going to plug, would you recommend that people start thinking about iPaaS? I know Jitterbit is a sponsor here, so.
Absolutely. I mean, I think middleware is really, to me, the sensible way of integrating systems. And if you are going to, upgrade your ERP in any way, shape, or form, having that layer in there, is something I recommend.
So it's almost like that needs to be part of the thought process of the whole
It has
transformation, is how are you going to bring all these systems together through some sort of middleware iPaaS solution. Basically.
Otherwise, you're just recreating the problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Just
With
make it
point-to-point connections that, what are you going to do, later when something needs to get replaced?
So as we get close to wrapping up, is there anything else that you would like to say? Anything else you want to add to this wonderful edition of our podcast?
Well, if you need any help in the
How can people find you, Bill?
let me know. I'm bill@chameleon.co. So.
That
sounds great. And are we about at the wrap-up point?
Yeah. I'm checking my phone to check the time because I'm used to being at a computer, right?
I know.
So it's a new format for me. So really grateful to have you here, Bill, and constantly learning from you. So it's awesome to have your knowledge, and people will be listening to this outside of the event, hopefully.
Yes.
Once we publish it.
To remind everyone again, it's the hard truth about B2B e-commerce. And we're just going to keep going.
I'm going to give it one. It is technically, and I say technically because it's almost a joke, it is technically the #1 B2B e-commerce podcast in the world. And I joke because there's not that many people put the effort to make 105 episodes about B2B e-commerce.
We do have listeners worldwide, we discovered. In Australia, South Africa, a lot of Eastern Europe and Western Europe, everywhere.
Alibaba reached out to me. I know we've had listeners from Amazon. Netherlands is a surprisingly very sophisticated B2B e-commerce country.
Everyone loves us in the Netherlands. Everyone does. Hello, Netherlands.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you, Bill.